Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nimhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger, and we're here on episode 193, and a little bit late for my taste. I've been playing around with exactly what to do with this episode because I had like 7 or 8 different ideas, and I got kind of caught in the middle of all of them. And in the end, I'm going to go with my first idea anyway. So I want to talk to you about some, I thought, really important sound from Mike Macdonald yesterday, share some of it, but also share some of my reactions to it and talk with all of you about it. I'm also in the process of working on my season progress report. So after every 4 games of the season, I will kind of look at where the Seahawks are. I'll look at individual players. I'll look at the team overall, and I'll do some comparisons and some projections. We'll talk about that. So I'm going to work on that. Not sure exactly when that will be ready. I'm going to see how far I can get today. Possible I'll do another episode just on that today, or I will save that for tomorrow or another point. But we'll see how far I can get on that. It's also a very big day for the Seahawks in general. This is the first real practice day since the Monday night game, so we'll learn a lot more about the injury situation for the Seahawks today. And then we will hear from Geno Smith. We will hear from Ryan Grubb. We will hear from Aden Dirty. And so a lot to go on there. Before I get into some of the details on the Mike Macdonald sound, latest news relative to the Giants game. A report came out today from, I should make sure I attribute this to the right person, Jordan Raanan, who is the ESPN reporter for the Giants. Hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Says that Malik Neighbors seems like a long shot to play in this game on Sunday. That's not a surprise given the fact that he was in concussion protocol and in the early stages of concussion protocol yesterday. Devin Singletary, the running back, told Jordan that he thinks there's a decent chance he'll be able to make it. Said it's the best he's felt since the Cowboys game, so we'll see. But their running back is day to day with a groin injury, so we'll see about that. So I think that was the news of the day. The other thing that I'll just share out informationally that I put on Twitter, but in case folks aren't on there seeing it, keep in mind that the PUP rules, the way that works is that when a team designates you to return, it opens up a 21-day window during which you can still practice but not be counted against a 53-man roster. And during that time, players are getting back up to speed, and keep in mind that players are not allowed to practice before they start that window. So if you've got a guy that's been injured for a year or many, many months, and then you're bringing them back, generally speaking, you're going to want at least 2 weeks of practice before they play. A lot of times you're going to want a full 3 weeks of practice before you really put them out on a football field. So Cameron Young was a guy that they brought up off, they activated or opened his window, I think is the correct phrasing, yesterday. So he's now got 21 days to start practicing. It wouldn't surprise me if Cameron Young gets used before the full 21 days. His injury was a little bit later, and I'm just not so sure how serious it is. He also plays a position where, I'm not as convinced he's going to have as much like cardio and other things that he's going to need to come up to speed on. He might play 10 snaps a game if he does play. So he may come a little sooner. But the implications there for someone like Abe Lucas or Jarek Reed, I was a little surprised Jarek Reed was not also put in his window. That could be because of his injury. It could be because they aren't quite sure what they want to do with him roster-wise. And by waiting a little bit longer, they can give themselves some time to think like, well, we got Kobe Bryant, Kayvon Wallace, we've got Julian Love, Rayshon Jenkins. We may just not have a spot at safety. So let's wait a little bit longer and see if someone gets injured or something like that. That kind of happened with Kobe Bryant last year, to be honest. I think that he could have come back. They eventually just really didn't see a spot for him. So I think they waited that one out. But Abe Lucas, that's the one obviously we're all really keeping our eye on. And, the fact that they didn't open his window means that it's really at least 28 days until he would probably be activated, because you got a week till next week. And then if they open his window next week, that would be 21 days from then. And so it's probably more likely the week after that. And you're talking about getting into week 9 or so, about when the 21 days would be up. Week 10 is the bye week. So they may just be playing this out to bring him back after the bye week. It is just one way to guess at this. It's just a pure guess, but we'll see a little bit what happens there, but just something to keep an eye on. If you haven't already given the show a like and click subscribe, I would appreciate it if you could do so. Also, if you haven't gone over to ftnfantasy.com and used promo code HBAM, what are you waiting for, folks? FTN Fantasy, great place to get all your data about the Seahawks and about the rest of the NFL. I saw that today. I was looking at the betting model, and the Seahawks are not looking to, they don't have a clear edge to cover the 6.5 point spread that they've got over the Giants. I think it's about a 3% edge or something like that. So they do expect the Seahawks to win this game by about, 30 by a decent amount of points, but I don't believe that they expect them to cover. So use HBAM as your promo code to get 15% off. It's only it's like less than $8 a month. I'm a subscriber. Highly recommend you do it as well. So let's get to it. Let's get to the Mike Macdonald sound, and let's bring Mr. Macdonald to the stage here. And there are a few clips I wanted to play, and we're going to start with just one off the jump where Mike Macdonald talks about, a short week. And I think there were some things in here that I thought were instructive about our new coach and how he thinks about players and player health.
Week. So this is a little funky operation here. I'm not sure which press conference this is. Is this the Wednesday press conference, or is this the post-game press conference? But yeah, the guys have had yesterday off. We started late today, try to get some more sleep, some more recovery. We'll go slower today and then really ramp up and kick it into gear tomorrow. So looking forward to the next few days and taking the next step.
The thing for me that I found interesting is, one, I didn't know getting to the VMAC yesterday whether or not they were going to be practicing. I mean, short week, bad game for the defensive head coach. He was clearly not happy with how things went in that game on the defensive side. I don't think anybody would have been. Does he turn that anger and frustration that he had about that performance into kind of punishing the team, or making them feel like that wasn't good enough? Let's get to the field and let's fix it. It doesn't even have to necessarily be totally punitive, but how is he going to react to it? The fact that he was as frustrated as he was in a performance as bad as that was on defense, and that his response is to give the guys a day off coming back from the travel, I thought was really interesting. And I think that there's this, people are trying to figure out who Mike Macdonald is, and they're trying to put him into a box in certain ways. Like I've heard, there's jokes about him sounding like Bill Belichick on his morning, show with Brock and Salk. And I don't know, man. I don't think that's the box he should be in. And I think that this is a guy that really not only cares about his players, but cares about, sports science and making sure that they're in, a good spot to be able to succeed as players. And so, yeah, I thought that was interesting, and a decision that I'm not sure every coach would have made. So that was one. The next thing I wanted to share was a question I asked the coach, and I was interested in this, about what do you do with game planning? I know for a fact there were times Pete Carroll had his team on these types of situations where you have a Thursday night game following a Sunday night game, especially if it's a division opponent, where you're doing game planning for both, where you're getting a head start on the Thursday game, even while you're preparing for the Sunday game. And so I wanted to know how Mike Macdonald was going to approach that. And here is what the coach said about that.
No, we're 150,000% on the Giants right now. And then when the game ends, we'll be 150,000% on the Niners. I'm sure, a lot of our younger coaches, once this week starts to wind down, they'll be working ahead. But all of our focus is on the Giants until the game's over.
So, yeah, I thought that was, again, this is about learning about our coach, learning about his philosophy and how he approaches things. And he is a mindful guy who is going to focus on what's right in front of him. I don't think there's a right and a wrong answer here, by the way. So if he had said, yeah, we're doing both, I wouldn't have blinked an eye. If he said what he said, I don't blink an eye. There's not a right or a wrong. It's just who is he and how does he approach things? And that's part of why I ask some of the questions I ask, is just to help us get to know him and how he thinks. And that's a challenge. I mean, I am probably going to ask him another point, or maybe I'll even ask Grubb and Dirty today about it. But for division rival teams, I would hope that they have been exploring and game planning and scouting those guys in the off season throughout the year, and not just waiting for the weeks when they are playing them. These games they're count pretty much double any other game. And especially the games against the 49ers, those are huge measuring stick opportunities and really like going to set a floor or ceiling for your season. So it is a challenge to have that game on such a short week. It is at home, which is a benefit. But going to be interesting to see, how that works out, given the challenges that they're facing. We do have a new member here, Liam Marshall. I want to welcome Liam. It's so great to see. I mean, I really love it when people join as members. It's been awesome to see all the memberships that have been given away. People that go and sign up as a member themselves. It's really, really something that I appreciate, and I appreciate the support, and hope that you are a welcomed and great member of the community. So thank you for that. So the next thing that McDonald talked about that I thought was interesting was kind of to this question of how this is your first loss. How do you respond to your first loss, and how do you want the team to respond to their first loss? Here's what the coach had to say.
I think, that every day's approach is going to be the same expectation. We're trying to improve. We're trying to take the next step. Let's look at what happened through an impartial eye so we can attack the problems, and let's move forward. Let's keep it positive, man. There's a lot of good stuff on tape. A lot of stuff we obviously need to, fix and make right. So, but that's the case anytime we step foot out there and toe the line. So that'll be the same mentality.
There should be some familiar themes in there. Look at it from an impartial eye. What does that sound like? Sounds like Tell the Truth Monday to me, from old Pete Carroll. And the thing that stood out to me there is, again, I'll just keep reiterating. He was so upset about the way his defense played in this game. And I think that lasted for a good 24 hours after that game was over. He clearly had kind of come back to center by the time he did this press conference. He was laughing more easily. He was more engaged, less tense. And he could have kind of responded to all of that with anger and frustration, pointed to the players or pointed to how he is interacting even here. But he talks about, approaching it with positivity. And again, all these things that I've heard from folks about that this guy is, he's too much of a hard ass, or he's, too intense. There's no fun in him. I think that this guy has, to me, demonstrated not the opposite, but that's just really an inaccurate view of who he is as a person and who he is as a coach. I do think that he continues to look towards the positive, and he continues to look towards what's right in front of you. And there's actually some more sound I'm going to play relative to that in a little bit. I asked him a little bit later about kind of this oddity that I don't know if anyone else had pointed out, but the last time that Mike Macdonald had coached a defense that allowed more than 40 points was in 2022 when the Ravens gave up 42 points to the Miami Dolphins. That was the game I wrote about morning after, I've talked about, but gave up 35 points in the second half, gave up 28 points in the fourth quarter alone. And so I asked him, like, you said in the past there's lessons you took away from that game. What of those lessons might apply here as you talk to the team? Here's what he said.
Well, I think it's two totally independent. It just so happens it's the same amount of points. I think that's probably the only thing in common. But it's the same mentality of, hey, let's look at how we're doing things. How can we make just how can we get incrementally better in all the processes, coaches, how we organize things, how we walk through players, how we take meetings, how we communicate in meetings, just how can we take incremental steps throughout the week, to put ourselves in position mentally so we can go out and play our best football. And then in game, how we're communicating as coaches, how we adjust, all those things. I mean, all those things are on the table. We've talked about them. Unfortunately, it's just this is creating an opportunity for us to really face those things head on, and that's what we're going to do.
Why'd you learn about?
There's some interesting pieces in there. I was hoping for more, I got to admit, on that, because he has in the past talked about that Miami game as being pretty pivotal, and that he really went back to his players with the coaches, reevaluated some things. And not that I thought that he'd say that about that this game had the same effect for him, but I was hoping he'd talk a little bit more about what he did in Baltimore and why maybe those things either did or didn't apply here. To some extent, he said at the beginning that he thinks the only thing that's really in common between those two games is that they scored the same amount of points. So perhaps what he's getting at there is he just doesn't see a lot of similarities. And maybe the problems that presented themselves in this game just are different than the ones that he identified in that Miami game a couple years ago. But his main point of emphasis here was not to overreact to the one game. It was to essentially look at the problems in front of them, look at all of the ways that they operate as coaches, as players, look for ways to be a little bit better this week than they were last week, and to keep the boat pretty steady and not like wildly swing one way or the other just based off of one game, even though it was a very bad game from a defensive perspective. He was asked about the right guard position. This was an important one as well. We're obviously all tracking this and want to see what's going to happen here. And so here was his answer about what he learned about the right guard position.
I don't think there's any conclusion with it right now. I think both guys played a good game. I think the offensive line probably played their best game of the season so far. So we haven't talked about specific snap counts this week, but I'd anticipate something similar moving forward in the near future.
So you've got essentially status quo for the right guard spot. I thought Christian Haynes played a good game. He got roughly 40% of the snaps. Anthony Bradford got roughly 60% of the snaps. My prediction is that that's going to flip. And I would not be shocked. If Christian Haynes gets his first start this week. That's one thing we have not seen. We've seen him rotate in but it would be interesting to see if he gets to start a game instead of rotate into a game. That would be a signal that this is starting to move in a direction. And I think there already is some indication that it's going that way. But, we'll talk to Ryan Grubb today, see if we can find out a little bit more on that. I wanted to ask Mike Macdonald about takeaways. His defenses have been great at taking the ball away. The team started really well in that regard in the first week of the season. But it's been zeros. It's been goose eggs since then. No takeaways in the last 3 weeks. And, I try to pull out some of these things that maybe other folks aren't thinking about or asking about so we can get a little bit more insight. And here is, I thought there's some interesting things that Coach said about the lack of takeaways. I asked him basically any reasons that he can see for why that's happening.
Everyone's got their theories on it, but it's, you can't go 3 games with no takeaways and 2 games in a row and losing the takeaway battle and expect to have success. So that's definitely a point of emphasis with us, but you got to do it the right way. The ball comes alive when you play the right way on defense. You can't sacrifice tackles for the ball. So all those things are important to stress, but I think it's more important that we focus on playing the right way and attacking the ball when those opportunities come alive. And then I think you might see some of those numbers start to jump.
This is actually an interesting contrast to Pete Carroll. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say Pete was like opposite, because it's not the case. But Pete would say, it's all about the ball, right? Like that turnover Thursday, like they would focus really clearly on takeaways as a really big deal. Not to say that Mike Macdonald doesn't, but his philosophy is it's not about actually trying to get takeaways. It is about, he talks about the ball coming alive by playing the right way, by being assignment sound. And one of the things he emphasizes is that he wants to not sacrifice tackling for turnovers, and that sometimes people go for the ball and they don't, and we've seen that a bunch of times, right? And they don't make the play, and then they both don't get the turnover and they give up yards. And so, I think I agree and agree with that philosophy about let's just play the game right, and then the ball starts to find you. But it's been 3 games. And so the defense, this is a week that they need to take the ball away from the Giants. I mean, they need to find a way to do that, and they need to be putting enough pressure and enough confusion on the opposing team that happens. And week 1, it just felt inevitable with how fast they were playing and how much pressure they were creating in different ways. But it hasn't felt as inevitable the last few weeks. And some of it's the way that the style of the teams that they played. But, to have come out of the game against the Dolphins without any turnovers, I think or any takeaways, just to be clear, not great. And Jared Goff played a heck of a game against them. He had 4 interceptions before that game. So that's, to me, it's an issue. It's an issue that needs to be, they need to find ways to be a more disruptive defense than they've been. And I think that's his general point. That's where the turnovers come from. This was an interesting one. Mike Dugar asked this question about, do you feel like this game, that the miscommunications and some of the issues were an outlier? And Mike jokes about the answer up front, but gets into some interesting pieces after that.
Some of the communication stuff.
I certainly hope so. Look, it's a, you start like attributing things to trends, and like it's just a dangerous place to go. To me, the easiest way to go about it, and really the best practice, is, hey, we're recency bias. We're going off of what we just saw. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page on what we need to do to get it fixed. I really do believe it's a play in, play out focus of understanding what's expected and getting it done. And and keeping it kind of in your cylinder. You know, we talk about 12 as one, and that's important, but that comes to life if you do your one and then your one and then some. The one has to come first. You can't do the and then some until you do your one, if that makes sense. So the guys will see it. It's very obvious. It's not good by any stretch of the word, but it is fixable, and that's what today's for. But we got to move on quickly because game's coming up quick.
That was a fabulous answer. I think so much of what he believes came out in that answer, and you heard a few different emphasis points there that jumped out to me. One, he does not want to chase trends. He doesn't want to say, hey, like, this has been going on, and so it's going in a certain direction. He wants to basically just look at the latest information he has. He talked about recency bias. You know, he wants to look at what they're just most recently seeing and address it. So that's one part of it, and I think that's it is certainly a fine process to have. I personally do believe that trends are important. I'll often talk about trends, but depending on who your data science person is, there's debates about this. I think one thing, just geeky side, I'll point out there is humans tend to be really bad at like predicting things, and by looking at data and then coming up to conclusions about what's going to happen with things. So from a just pure decision making perspective, looking at your most recent information is probably the most sound. Then the other thing that he talked about is he's talked about this 12 as one, but you can't get to the 12 as one unless the one is doing their job, and then some. He said, like, essentially, you can think about this as there's 11 guys on the field. To get to 12, everyone's got to do a little bit extra, but they first got to do their job. And so I think that the point being there that, everyone's got to do their job well. And he's talking about it being a play in, play out kind of thing. So that is each player knowing and doing what they're supposed to do each individual play, as opposed to how did they play this game overall. And, again, I think that that's a really solid approach and philosophy. And, it's good to kind of hear these things. If you are listening, he is telling you about who he is and what he believes. He hasn't published a book, he's not probably going to ever publish a book, but there is a lot of insight into how he thinks about things. If you listen to kind of how he's answering some of these questions. Last thing I wanted to play for you all was a question I asked for him at the end. And I have to admit, I didn't love my phrasing. I was kind of playing with it throughout the press conference, trying to think of how I wanted to ask this question. But what I've noticed about Mike Macdonald is one of the things is that he will both be reluctant to give credit to a player or a coach. Like if you ask him about Gino, or you ask him about Ryan Grubb, or you ask him about, a lot of these guys, he's kind of like, his first response is a little bit of a pause and kind of measured. I think he seems to have a reluctance to assign too much credit to the individual as opposed to the group. Then on the other side, he is very quick to take accountability. He did it after this game when something's wrong. And he talked about on his Brock and Salk show that, he takes responsibility for what was on the field. And so I thought that it was worth kind of asking him. He also talked about accountability. So how does he think about this notion of accountability, where there's coaches that absolutely would call out a player, say, hey, Kayvon Wallace did this the wrong way. He can't make that mistake. There's other coaches like Mike who would actually Pete would deflect away from those guys. I don't think Mike's deflecting. I think Mike is owning his role. And so he had a really interesting answer here. And he went on a little bit, and this is what ended up finishing the press conference. But listen to him talk about his answer here.
I don't know where it starts. I just think that's the way to do it. Look, whatever shows up on tape is my responsibility. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for what goes on out there. And our guys are fighting their tails off to go do it. No player is ever going to show up and want to do it the wrong way. I mean, everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to be productive. Everybody wants to have success. The secret sauce is when you can get it when you can get it playing together, and they're playing for one another, and they're excited for everybody else's success. I think, that's what we're building, and that's what we're trying to create. And I think I have to do my part to make that happen.
That was a fabulous answer. It was a fabulous answer. I think that what you hear from Mike Macdonald there is that, one, getting on a player with the implication that the player is, not doing their best is not productive. And that every player is trying to be good. They're trying to do their job well. And so I think that having that knowledge and that belief, and then coming in and basically pointing fingers, obviously isn't going to be productive or constructive. I think also that the fact that he makes it very clear that everything that happens on the field is his responsibility. I think he tells you a lot about who he is and how he thinks about. You might think every coach would say that. No, they don't. And they don't think that way. There's a lot of coaches that you can read in their body language and how they speak, or like literally what they say, that they do think, yeah, the player screwed me there. They're not doing their job right. The GM screwed me. Like, I got stuck with these people. I'm doing my best. The refs screwed me, like a million other things, right? Like, you just forget coaches, just think about people in the world. How many people in the world do you know who genuinely, when something goes wrong, first look at themselves look in the mirror, see if there's something that they could have done differently and better? It is the very small minority. Like, the vast majority of people in the world are uncomfortable with their own reflection, uncomfortable with taking accountability or responsibility, and are much more comfortable like assigning it to the blame elsewhere. That's not who Mike Macdonald is. And so I think that in this case, you're hearing a guy who's genuinely, when you talk about someone who's wound tight, which Mike Macdonald is, this is something that contributes to that. When you feel genuinely that you're responsible for everything that's going on, there's really no end to the day for you. There's no end to what you could or should be doing. And actually the word should can be an enemy of someone that's wired this way, because constantly thinking about what he should have done. And for someone that's genuinely looking to take responsibility, often the word should is something you should eliminate, because it's just natural that you're going to do everything you can, and you shouldn't be beating yourself up about it. So I liked hearing this from Mike Macdonald. I liked the fact that he is focusing on, how to keep it an us versus an us instead of us versus them. And you will see this absolutely in the NFL, where coaches versus players is there's a division there, and he's working really hard in all his communications to make sure that that's not the case. So, everyone's going to be talking about X's and O's with Mike. I've talked about it. We'll continue to talk about it. I think it's important to get to know the leader of your football team and your football, part of your organization. We've gotten to know John Schneider over the years. I think we have a decent idea of how he like what makes him tick. We obviously got to know Pete Carroll really well. And, I think that we're learning a lot about Mike Macdonald during these times, and you do tend to learn about folks when things are going the wrong way, and they went the wrong way this past Monday. So there will be more times of adversity. We will see how he handles that. This, to me, was a really good first lesson in how he responds. And then the next lesson that we're going to get is how the team responds on Sunday. And I'm already braced for even if they play a dominant game, everyone will be like, well, yeah, they can beat the bad teams. As far as I'm concerned, like, you go out and you play with energy, you play well, you play with precision. That's what I'm looking for. And if the score is 30-10 or 25-13 or whatever it is, it's the energy that his guys come out and play with, and it is the like precision that they play with that will tell me more about who he is as a coach than the score. So that's the next piece. And look, we're going to be talking about the 49ers game very soon, and that is a huge measuring stick game. There's no question about it. You ask me right now, like, that's a tough matchup based on how things looked against Detroit, based off the injury situation. That is a tough matchup. So a lot has to go right in the next week. I mean, literally a week from today will be the next game after Sunday. And so a lot has to go right in the next 7 days for the Seahawks to win that game. I don't think they will be favored in that game. And I don't think that they should be favored in that game right now. And so a lot of things have to change. If they do, it would be friggin' amazing. Certainly would be fun. So I am going to leave you all there for this episode. I'm going to get to working on my season progress report and get some of that content ready. And then I'm going to get ready to head down to the VMAC as well. If you haven't already clicked on like and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. We're pushing down towards our 13,000 subscribers. It would be great to add you. And would also appreciate if you could go over to patreon.com/hawkblogger, sign up there. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. Yes. So if you go to patreon.com/hawkblogger, sign up there, would get all the access to the audio versions of this show, as well as my locker room interviews that I do. I did a Laken Tomlinson and a Miles Adams interview yesterday that are up there. And you get access to the Slack channel where you can talk to everybody. And for the folks that want to keep the conversation going, then sign up to patreon.com, head over to the Slack channel. That's where the conversation goes on 24 hours a day. It's a really, really great community, and it's a great way. There's no reason you can be in Patreon and a YouTube member. A lot of people are doing both. It's a great way to be. So thanks to everybody who's on. I see that there's folks that would love me to keep going. I appreciate that. I will have more for you, but I got to balance, like, one of the things that's for me at least, I do like getting to depth on some things. And with my daily cadence of this show, usually I'm a morning person. That's why I have a morning show. This is when I do my best research. And so it's a little bit challenging for me to get to the depth that I want while doing the morning show. So I've got to sometimes head over to put the show down and just get to work on some of the data that I want to start looking into, so I can give you guys some other like novel insights, because that's what I built Hawk Blogger on over the last 18 years, is kind of looking into depths and into nooks and crannies that other people aren't going to do because they're not obsessed the way that I'm obsessed. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on that, but I really appreciate everyone that tuned in. And thanks to everybody who's been watching today. I will be with you all again here real soon. Until then, I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. This has been episode 193 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care, y'all.